Trump says the negotiations are going to start Friday after they sign the big peace deal in Switzerland. He said of the Iranians, quote, "We're dealing with people that I think are very rational." Yeah, compared to you and your negotiating team, of course they're rational. Look, there may be something signed. I don't know if Trump is going to show up in Switzerland. We don't know what's in the deal. I don't think there's a deal. I hope there's a deal. We'll talk about it Thursday. I go live Thursday at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. The night before the deal is signed, we'll talk about it. Well, the New York Times out with an investigative piece about the August 10th, 2019 death of Jeffrey Epstein. My conclusion from this article in the New York Times, and I recommend you read it, my conclusion is Trump's Justice Department didn't need to kill Epstein. All they had to do was create conditions ripe enough for Epstein to do it for them. Epstein was fully aware he faced life in prison, where everyone knows the odds for a known child predator, well, abysmal. Not going to survive in lockup if you're a child predator, especially at the scale Epstein was. Epstein knew that he would spend his life in isolation because that's the only way the Bureau of Prisons could protect him. And say what you want about Epstein, he was a social animal or an asocial animal. He needed to be around people, and he was looking at a death sentence. We know when Epstein was found, he was not allowed to be alone inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center, but he was left alone. Right there, the fact that he was left alone in his cell is how you get someone to take their own life. According to the New York Times today, despite a jail psychologist writing that Epstein was no longer showing signs of suicidal ideations, this after his first attempt to kill himself, despite a psychologist writing that he wasn't worried that Epstein would kill himself, Epstein, according to today's New York Times, made it very clear to others that he very much was intent on ending his life. Again, you don't need to kill Epstein, you just needed to make him want to die. The Times spoke with a former cellmate who said after Epstein's first suicide attempt, he continued to work on fashioning nooses for his neck and repeatedly said, "I can't go on." If you believe in justice, if you believe in getting the truth out, then you do whatever it takes to make certain Jeffrey Epstein couldn't take the easy way out and die with his secrets, which he did. And that is what the powerful people wanted. Epstein was held inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Anyone who's ever read about conditions inside the Metropolitan Correction Center would say, well, of course he killed himself. He went from the largest apartment in Manhattan to a windowless 8-foot cell. He was stuck in there for 23 hours, zero sunlight, cut off from the entire world, forced to use an open-air toilet that sometimes he had to share if and when he had a cellmate. Epstein reportedly had a mild nervous breakdown in lockup when he was forced to share his cell with a dirty cop on trial for multiple homicides. The cop was found guilty, now serving 4 consecutive life sentences. He has asked Donald Trump for a pardon. We know Epstein tried to kill himself at least once inside that jail. And once it became apparent he wanted to do it again, some kind of intervention should have taken place, not because Epstein deserved to live, because his victims deserve both justice and truth. In his jail writings, Epstein complained of the intense heat inside his jail cell, the stale air, and being unable to sleep from the incessant banging noises and screams. Epstein was the Metropolitan Correctional Center's first suicide in 21 years. Why? Why hadn't there been a suicide at the Metropolitan Correctional Center for 21 years before Epstein offed himself? Well, they had psychologists on staff to watch for the warning signs and prevent suicide. Now, the conditions were made ripe for someone to kill themselves, but they added to the torture by knowing how to keep the inmates from taking themselves out of their own misery. That's how the American penal system works. They make it so you want to kill yourself, but there's 24-hour surveillance so you don't. It's torture. Our prison system is torture, and part of that torture is making sure the inmates stay alive so they can be tortured. Unless, of course, they're holding on to secrets that could bring down a president. Our Attorney General at the time was Bill Barr, whose father gave Epstein his first job teaching calculus at the preppy Dalton School on the Upper East Side of New York. Epstein got that job despite Epstein having no college diploma. I don't know, I don't know if Dalton is on the Upper East Side. I would assume it is. Now, Bill Barr, who was the Attorney General at the time of his death, could have simply said, no special treatment for Epstein. And that alone could create a type of institutional drift that allowed the jail to become unbearable for Epstein and easy for him to do what the rich and powerful people wanted him to do to himself. The Times today reports that there was plenty of opportunity for someone to sneak into Epstein's cell the night he died. The Times writes, quote, killing Epstein would have required not just the complicity of one or two on-duty guards. It would have entailed an elaborate choreography involving at least two distinct operations of the jail, the Special Housing Unit and the Control Center, at least one of which was unpredictably staffed. It would have also required detailed knowledge of the Special Housing Unit's camera placements and which recording systems were malfunctioning and which were not. And it would have required a willingness to risk capital charges, the death penalty, for the murder of an inmate in a federal facility, unquote. So the Times writing today that, yes, the cameras were malfunctioning. It was possible for two people to conspire to kill Epstein. They talk of a mysterious orange blob, which we've talked about before. But to me, it's so much easier to make it so Epstein does it for you. Come on, first suicide at that jail in decades. The Metropolitan Correctional Center is in Lower Manhattan. It is a federal jail designed primarily to hold inmates awaiting federal trial. It was built to house 450, but before it was closed in August of 2021, mostly because Epstein's death drew attention to its crumbling infrastructure. At the time, the jail was holding twice that, close to 900 inmates. Among the high-profile inmates, besides Epstein, there was El Chapo. He passed through there. John Gotti, Frank Lucas, played by Denzel, Bernie Madoff, Ramzi Youssef, who was responsible for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Horrible conditions, but none of these guys killed themselves in that jail awaiting trial. Epstein did. Somehow they couldn't keep Epstein alive. They were able to keep everybody else alive, not Epstein. Seems odd. Seems odd. 18 material witnesses to the Kennedy assassination died either by suicide or by mysterious causes within 3 years of the killing. The London Sunday Times in 1967 wrote that the statistical odds of that happening were 100,000 trillion to 1. 18 material witnesses to the Kennedy assassination dying either by suicide or from mysterious causes within 3 years of the shooting. According to the London Times in 1967, the statistical odds of that were 100,000 trillion to 1. But tell me again, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Why do I bring up the Kennedy assassination? Because I'm obsessed with it, and because whoever was behind his killing understood that November 22nd, 1963 was nothing more than a fishing trip. Maybe we'll get something today. Maybe we won't. But there's always tomorrow. It was a fishing trip. Maybe we'll catch him today. Maybe not. I've talked about stochastic terrorism in the past. Trump doesn't have to directly order his goons to storm the Capitol. Benjamin Netanyahu didn't have to order the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, who was making peace with the Palestinians. All they needed to do, all Trump and Netanyahu needed to do, was release enough bile into the ether, and someone eventually acted on it. That's what stochastic terrorism is. The same applies to killing Kennedy and Epstein. You can set the wheels into motion, create conditions that will eventually lead to Kennedy getting shot without you pulling the trigger or any of it getting traced back to you. Same thing with Epstein. While he was in federal custody, Trump was president. Bill Barr was the attorney general. Just enough malignant neglect was needed so they could innocently create conditions horrible enough for Epstein to do it himself, or create conditions so lax someone could sneak in and do it without anyone in the Bureau of Prisons or the DOJ knowing who it was or why they did it. One thing we've learned from this current Trump administration is there are way too many people willing to turn a blind eye, act like it's not happening. Whatever it is, they'll act like it's not happening. It's a conspiracy of silence, refusing either to bear witness or speak up because it's in their best interests not to know, not to see, and not to say. What struck me during Sunday night's UFC fight on the White House lawn was both the brutality of the sport and the depravity of the people who showed up for it. I'm also stunned by the dearth of outrage for this sport. It's an abomination. Have you seen it? Have you watched it? It's everything that's wrong with humanity. It's everything we aim to evolve beyond. It's hockey and football with just the concussions. It's two people trying to kill themselves in a cage covered in each other's blood. Yeah, I watched it, partly out of curiosity. I watched it. And also because, I'll admit it, it tapped into some primal need I have to see two men try to kill each other. It's a sport as much as pornography is cinema. Again, I have nothing against pornography, but I'm not proud that I watch it. The same way I'm not proud that I watched that UFC fight held on the very same South Lawn where Bill Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed the Oslo Accords in 1993. And that is why Benjamin Netanyahu, through stochastic terrorism, got Yitzhak Rabin assassinated. We've been over that. His assassin is celebrated as a hero by the people in Netanyahu's government. I've been over this. Now is not the time. But Netanyahu and Yitzhak Rabin's wife at the funeral turned to Benjamin Netanyahu and said, "You did this. You did this." They killed Rabin because he was making peace with the Palestinians. So the same South Lawn where Clinton had the Oslo Accord signed, Trump had a cage match. That's for his 80th birthday. We have a president unable to get a peace deal with Iran delivered for his birthday. He wanted to be able to announce that he defeated Iran for his 80th birthday. So instead, he saturated himself in the sweat and blood of UFC fighters while our military cheered them and him on. Yet left unsaid that night was the humiliating truth that we can only get Iran to open up Hormuz through diplomacy. All this violence they were celebrating for Trump's 80th birthday was just that, useless violence that some people are cashing in on. But to associate our military with UFC fighting as if that's going to get Hormuz open, who are you kidding? Despite all our bombs, Iran on Trump's 80th birthday held all the cards, still does. You got a lot of MAGA supporters, a lot of Republicans and conservatives now who want to see the memorandum of understanding. What's in it? Why won't Trump show it to us? What are you agreeing to? This is his birthday party with the UFC fighting. That was overcompensating for impotence, reinforcing our nation's phony masculinity, cheering on two men fighting to their deaths, while our president and his sons wouldn't dream of shedding a drop of blood for this war that they so very much support. The main event was repulsive. Now I'm going to get the names wrong. Justin Gaethje, I think is his name, became the UFC lightweight champion. He scored a TKO against the undefeated Ilia Topuria. I apologize. Those are two names you want to get right if you ever meet them. But Ilia Topuria. Cameras were allowed inside the Oval Office, where Topuria, that's him, during the fight, he lost. Topuria stood before the Resolute desk, John Kennedy's desk, now Trump's. And we watched him walk through the halls of the People's House, out underneath the claw, into the cage, while bathed in patriotic and Christian imagery. So I understand for the fighters, this may be their only choice in life. I have a little sympathy for the fighters, but it's not something to be celebrated. It's not to be celebrated that there are some men and women who have no other choice but to try to kill somebody else for a living. It's not to be celebrated. It's to be fixed. You don't use the White House to dignify everything that's wrong with our country. You use the White House to make it so nobody ends up becoming a UFC fighter. This is the decay of our country. The first Trump administration was WWE, wrestling, which is great. It's fake fighting. Linda McMahon is our education secretary right now. Vince McMahon, I think, is on trial for some disgusting allegations that even I won't repeat. But at least it was fixed. At least you knew this was a joke. We've devolved to the point now where we're having blood sports, real blood sports on the White House lawn. Trump's children were all there, all of them. And Melania was there. It really made me think twice about Melania. Bobby Kennedy Jr. was there. The guy who says vaccines cause autism, but kicks to the head shake the worms loose. I watched in horror, and this is all I'm going to show you. This is Topuria's face getting rearranged, blood spattering the cage. I watched it. Before the fifth round, a doctor mercifully stopped the fight. But I was watching the end of the third round before the fourth round, and ringside medics were calling to stop the fight. There was bleeding in and around and from Topuria's right eye, which was already completely swollen. The fight should have been stopped. His eye socket completely shattered. The only thing keeping his eye from rolling out was the puffiness around it. And while the debate to stop the fight continued, the ringside announcers who were calling the fight for Paramount Plus, they accused Topuria of stalling, buying recovery time. The two men calling the fight were John Anik and Joe Rogan. I couldn't believe they were looking at a man clearly in the throes of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, barely able to see or stand. And Joe Rogan and this guy Anik were accusing him of trying to go beyond the 60-second rest period between rounds. I always knew Rogan was an appalling person, but I see where his fan base comes from, and to watch him delight in this, well, there is something seriously wrong with anyone who doesn't think there is clearly something seriously wrong with UFC fighting. I am stunned by the number of people who think this is acceptable. You know, the night before this, the Knicks delivered a sublime lesson in overcoming the odds. This UFC fight was something that would make Michael Vick gag. Melania wasn't just there. She walked on to the blood-splattered cage with her family to congratulate the winner. Now, we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know. Epstein claims he introduced Melania to Donald Trump. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what Melania did for a living or who she hung out with before she married Donald. But watching her step into that cage, surrounded by the blood and body parts from that fight, it made me wonder. I do know she's part of it. She's part of it. These people are the worst. They are the worst. And you know who was there? Mark Zuckerberg, head of Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg. There he is, smiling, sucking up to Donald Trump. Facebook. I didn't want to talk about this, but I am. They're shutting me down, Facebook, because they claim this show is too sexual in nature. Facebook sent me a note on June 2nd saying we can no longer recommend your show, and we are throttling back its visibility due to the sexual nature of its content. This after a video of mine had 1.5 million views attacking Donald Trump. I guess it was too sexual in nature. So, I'm not making this up. I didn't want to talk about it. If you subscribe to this show on Facebook, it's next to impossible to find my show because it's too sexual in nature. Apparently, Facebook thinks my ass is way too hot, but I don't even show my ass. Now, I don't know if Facebook is eventually going to de-throttle my show. Good luck finding it on Facebook. I got a note at the beginning of June telling me my show will still be available on Facebook, but due to the sexual content, we will make it harder for your subscribers to find you. They put it in writing. And there's Mark Zuckerberg, head of Facebook, sucking up to Trump for Trump's 80th. Hey, Mark Zuckerberg, would Facebook unthrottle the show if I incite an insurrection the way Trump did? Is that how I can get in your good graces? Because I remember you shut him down and then you put him back up after January 6th. Is that what it takes to incite an insurrection for me to be considered acceptable for Facebook? I violated community standards. Yeah, community standards, my red hot ass. I have a hot ass. This show is too sexual in nature for Facebook. Also there was David Ellison, the new owner of CBS News and CNN. He showed up for the fight. Only hours before the big UFC birthday fight, Trump's Department of Justice approved David Ellison's purchase of CNN's parent company, Warner Discovery. So this is the guy who hired Barry Weiss to kill 60 Minutes and CBS News. David Ellison, in clear violation of antitrust and FCC laws and or regulations, he now owns two gigantic conglomerates, Warner Discovery and Paramount. And he did it all by himself. Worked his way up, just a self-made, his father, Larry Ellison, founded Oracle, and his half a man of a son wants to run two studios using his daddy's money. And foreign investors. That's been left out of the equation. Sovereign funds from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE helped him buy Warner Discovery. Who does he think he is? Jared Kushner? Yeah. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE are in on 25% of David Ellison's purchase of Warner Discovery. Now, it seems to me, if I remember correctly, Rupert Murdoch had to become a U.S. citizen before this country allowed him to buy Fox, because television stations have to be owned by Americans. So we made him a citizen. One of the biggest mistakes this country ever committed. So our public airwaves are supposed to be owned by American citizens. CNN technically doesn't have to answer to the FCC because it's cable, but it does have to answer a little to the FCC on things like closed captioning. CBS News has to answer to the FCC, so there can't be any foreign ownership of CBS News. Regardless, it's clearly a violation of our antitrust laws. On June 16th, Charles Homans, Steve Eder, Jan Ransom, and Michael Rothfeld from the New York Times wrote that the team inside the Department of Justice investigating Ellison's $110 billion purchase of Warner Discovery, they were preparing a memo encouraging the Department of Justice to block it, warning that this deal was in clear violation of antitrust laws. There are no studios left. Disney bought Fox. There's basically Disney and Sony, and now David Ellison. That's it. According to the Times, the antitrust team inside the Department of Justice examining the deal never got a chance to finish their memo recommending against it, and were shocked to discover top officials inside the Department of Justice overrode the process and greenlit this purchase without first allowing the antitrust team to weigh in. The lawyers inside Donald Trump's DOJ's antitrust division didn't even get a chance to formally oppose the deal. They just rubber stamped it. No questions asked. Well, last year, David Ellison purchased Paramount, parent company of CBS, Comedy Central, MTV, CBS News. And in order for that deal to go through, CBS News cut a check for $16 million to the Trump Presidential Library to settle a frivolous lawsuit Trump filed against 60 Minutes. He didn't like the way they edited an interview with Kamala Harris. It was extortion, pure extortion. There are reports that Ellison also promised Trump that the network would run $20 million worth of public service announcements for any cause deemed worthwhile by Donald Trump. So we know before the Department of Justice greenlit Ellison's purchase of Warner Discovery last week, Ellison also donated millions to Trump's demolition of the East Wing of the White House to build his grand ballroom. And there are now reports that Eric Trump texted former UFC champion and MMA commentator, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this properly, Daniel Cormier. I think that's how you pronounce it. There are reports that Eric Trump texted former UFC champion and MMA commentator Daniel Cormier, wanting to know if any, that was my W.C. Fields impersonation. Daniel Cormier wanted to know if any of the fights scheduled for his dad's birthday were rigged because he said, I want to place some bets. Screenshots from the texts showed up on Daniel Cormier's Twitter account, but Eric Trump and Cormier called the screenshots fake, AI generated, and Eric Trump said he never even spoke to Cormier. Cormier claiming his social media account was, quote, hacked or something. Okay. Do I believe Eric Trump is capable of doing something this stupid? Absolutely. I believe he's capable of being this stupid. Do I think he sent a text saying, I want to bet on this? Is it rigged? I don't know. what I do know is there have been suspiciously well-timed bets going all the way back to last year when Trump was announcing tariffs and then quickly calling them off. Markets move either way, and to know which way they're heading, well, that can make you a lot of money. In March, 15 minutes before Trump announced he was calling off missile strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure because peace talks were going so well, someone bet $500 million that the price of oil would plummet, which it did right after Trump made that announcement 15 minutes later. Someone 15 minutes before the announcement also poured $1.5 billion into an index fund that mimics the entire stock market, which then spiked after Trump's announcement 15 minutes later. Interesting, isn't it? Do I have it? Okay. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission chairman is Michael Selig, and he said an investigation has been launched into who's doing this trading, but so far nothing definitive has been discovered. The commission is warning that we may never know who made those trades because in the days of high-speed internet with trades routed through offshore bank accounts, it's next to impossible to trace the source of these bets. If you're dismissing this as the usual corruption, you're correct. But this level of corruption is what leads to massive economic disasters that destroy all our lives. It is the job of the Commodity Future Trading Commission to regulate, monitor, and pay attention to these markets to make certain no one is gaming them. Because once investors lose trust in the financial system, it collapses. It was Brooksley Born. Some of you might remember Brooksley Born. She served as Clinton's chairperson of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission from 1996 to 1999. And she said, we're going to have a financial meltdown. She warned before Congress in 2000 that there's a collapse coming because in the final year of the Clinton administration, the year 2000, Wall Street was given permission to place bets on the solvency of mortgages. They could also place bets now on the bets taken on those bets. That's how the financial collapse of 2008 started. And Brooksley Born, Clinton's chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, said, you cannot allow this. And Larry Summers was Clinton's Treasury Secretary, as well as Jeffrey Epstein's best friend. Summers silenced Brooksley Born, and 8 years later, capitalism as we know it came crashing down because why listen to a woman? So the current chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Brian Selig, was appointed by Trump. He used to be a lawyer representing the people he's now supposed to regulate in the cryptocurrency and growing offshore prediction markets. So it's his job now to keep an eye on the cryptocurrency business and the offshore prediction markets. But before taking this job, he was a lawyer who represented the people in the cryptocurrency and offshore prediction market businesses. He's on the side of people selling cryptocurrency like, Donald Trump, the Trump family, makes a fortune selling cryptocurrency to people who end up owning something that ends up completely worthless. Melania, speaking of worthless, received an undisclosed licensing fee to lend her name and image to a cryptocurrency called Melania. And Melania was released on Inauguration Day 2025. Shameless and illegal profiteering, but Pam Bondi was our Attorney General. Who's going to complain? Melania's cryptocurrency coin sold for more than $13 on Inauguration Day. She received an enormous fee, a licensing fee, for her likeness, and she didn't stand to lose or gain anything, whether the cryptocurrency went up or down. That's how licensing fees work. You get your money up front, maybe a taste of the back end, but mostly up front. So people who love Melania and our president, how could you not? They paid $13 for a Melania coin, which today is worth 8 cents. 8 cents. But Melania still got her money. It is estimated that since January of 2025, that's when Trump was sworn back in, the Trump family has been paid roughly $1 billion, possibly $1.5 billion in licensing fees to lend their name and image to cryptocurrencies. Doesn't matter what the cryptocurrency ends up selling for, they get their money up front. So in the past, Trump slapped his name on a building, a perfume, bottled water, steak. He didn't own those companies. Those companies paid him a licensing fee to put his name on it. But now he's slapping his name and his wife's name on something that doesn't even exist. A cryptocurrency. Nothing to hold, nothing to look at. The Trumps are also getting into the prediction markets. Now, all of these schemes are supposedly regulated by our good friend Brian Selig, who is chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. What are the prediction markets? Nobody is really quite sure. Brian Selig, chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, knows what prediction markets are because before becoming chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, he was a lawyer representing these companies. There are two major players in the prediction markets, Kalshi and Polymarket. Kalshi is regulated and licensed by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. So you can use Kalshi to bet on the Super Bowl, the outcome of an election, or what you think a gallon of gas will be selling for in 6 months. Polymarket is generally perceived as the seedier of the two prediction markets companies. Polymarket created some kind of tangential relation with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission through a subsidiary. So theoretically, it's now legal for Americans to use Polymarket. We think it's legal. We do know it's an international web of offshore accounts, heavily reliant on cryptocurrency and not part of the traditional banking system. In other words, the trades are impossible to trace. And Donald Trump sits on the board of Polymarket. Yeah, he sits on the board, sits on the advisory board. He's also a paid advisor to Kalshi, sits on their advisory board as well. And what does he get paid to do? To sit and essentially licensing the Trump name to give these two illegitimate companies a patina of legitimacy. The Trump family is in business with Trump's peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Steve Witkoff's family. They own a major stake in World Liberty Financial. That's a cryptocurrency business. Some have estimated from that business alone, the Trump family might have pocketed $1.4 billion in just licensing fees. Nobody's quite sure because Brian Selig, the head of the Commodities Trading Commission, answers to Donald Trump. This administration, because it's the beneficiary of unregulated betting, couldn't care less if there's anything illegal going on because they're in on it and they get their cash up front. Let's not forget Trump owned a casino, several casinos, and allowing someone like Trump to run the Justice Department, the FCC, the FTC, and the SEC, and the Commodity Trading Commission. This is exactly how you crash the world economy. Army Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke was arrested on April 23rd of this year, charged with using classified material to place a bet that the United States military would capture Nicolas Maduro in January. And he made the bet on Polymarket and won $400,000. I need not remind you that Don Jr. sits on the board of Polymarket. Trump, the father, was asked about this arrest. And Trump responded by asking the question, quote, well, I don't know enough about this. Was he betting that they would get Maduro or they wouldn't get him? And the reporter said, well, what does it matter? And Trump explained, quote, that's like Pete Rose betting on his own team. It's a little like Pete Rose. Pete Rose, they kept him out of the Hall of Fame because he bet on his own team. Now, if he bet against his team, that would be no good. But he bet on his own team. I'll look into it. So, in Trump's world, it's okay if Pete Rose bet on his own team. It's not okay. That's still inside information. If you know something about your own team that others don't, if you know your star reliever is back in rotation and you bet on that, it's just as corrupt as betting against your own team. Betting for your team or betting against your team doesn't matter. But Donald Trump doesn't care that Army Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke is charged with using inside information to place a bet on our military capturing Nicolas Maduro. Trump only thinks it's wrong if he used the inside information to bet against his own team. Trump is an immoral, useful idiot. And he's being kept inside the White House because when there's nobody watching the store, the rich and powerful rob it blind. Trump is a failure. He is. But he makes a lot of money for the people who put him in there. That's what David Ellison was doing at the fight. That's why Mark Zuckerberg was at the fight. Elon Musk became a trillionaire when SpaceX went public on Friday. And Trump facilitated that. Trump let Musk fire the head of the FAA, who was fining SpaceX for poisoning the air and endangering aircraft. Musk doesn't care about Tesla. He doesn't care about the $7,500 tax credit for EVs that Trump got rid of in one big beautiful bill. Musk doesn't care about electric cars. Musk's all in on the AI business. And you know who else is? Trump. Trump is in the data center business now. Be nice if we had a president who was concerned about us. He does, if you put him into office, he's a tremendous return on that investment. The oil companies were big donors. Every day Donald Trump pretends the Strait of Hormuz is about to open is another day of near record profits for the oil companies that put him there. Trump signed the border bill last week. Remember, it was held up for 100 days. It passed. He signed it. $70 billion over the next 2 years gets poured into Geo Group and CoreCivic, the for-profit prison giants who were huge donors to the Trump campaign. CoreCivic was the first donor to Trump's bid in 2024. The weapons manufacturers are looking at the Pentagon's budget going from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion because Trump depleted nearly half our nation's munitions by bombing Iran for absolutely no reason. And we're all going, what a moron. He's exhausted our munitions. And Trump and the military-industrial complex said, yeah, I'm such a moron. You're the ones who pay taxes. I don't. Who's the moron? Trump doesn't pay taxes. And there's a deal he made with his own Justice Department where no matter what he owes in back taxes, he doesn't have to pay. And we know he owes at least $100 million, at least $100 million to the government. We're the fools who pay our taxes. They don't. What do you think Jeff Bezos and Amazon paid last year? One big, beautiful bill was a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut for the richest 1%. So if you're a billionaire, yeah, Trump's an idiot, but he's your idiot. And he's delivered on all his campaign promises and then some to his donors. And along the way, during the past year and a half, he and his family have pocketed hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly $1.5 billion in cryptocurrency licensing fees alone. This $300 billion reconstruction fund that they're talking about for Iran, I told you about this like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now they think it's actually going to happen. Who do you think is going to be the beneficiary of a $300 billion international reconstruction fund for Iran if this ever goes through? It would be Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the two hucksters, charlatans who know nothing other than how to take money from your pocket and put it into theirs. They're going to be the ones who, they're not going to manage the reconstruction fund, but behind the scenes, they're going to get their cut. You know that. The Mafia calls this a bust out. You get an idiot to run a diner, make him the owner, then use that diner to clean dirty money and charge millions on the diner's credit account. And then when the bill comes due, the owner of the diner declares bankruptcy. It's what happened to the restaurant that they hung out in Goodfellas. They busted it out. Davies Sporting Goods in The Sopranos, that was a bust out. It's how you bust out a legal business. Use its line of credit to, I don't know, Tony Soprano bought airline tickets. If you own a diner, you use the line of credit to purchase washers and dryers or cars that you can fence. And then when the bank says to the diner, pay us back, the diner declares bankruptcy. On Wall Street, that's called a leveraged buyout. When the Mafia does it, it's a bust out. On Wall Street, when lawyers do it, it's called a leveraged buyout. That's how the worthless prick Mitt Romney made his fortune over at Bain Capital. Borrow money to purchase a perfectly good company, transfer the debt incurred to buy that perfectly good company, put that debt on the books of the perfectly good company you just bought. Saddle the company that you just bought with the debt you accrued to buy that company. Now the company has to pay off the debt you accrued to purchase it. So what do? Well, they raid the pension. They sell off all the businesses and the real estate. They fire everybody. And Bain Capital, they pay themselves enormous fees out of the company's treasury. And then when this perfectly good company can no longer pay its bills, it declares bankruptcy. You know, like the restaurant in Goodfellas or Davy's sporting goods store in The Sopranos. That's how it works. Caesars, the casino, Toys R Us, Payless Shoes, and Red Lobster, to name just a few, were all destroyed by private equity, saddling these perfectly good companies with enormous debt that was incurred to buy these companies. Now, this used to be illegal. Remember Red Lobster filed for bankruptcy in 2024? And on the news, they said it was because of the all-you-can-eat shrimp. Do you remember that? I remember going, what the F are you talking? That they made a mistake. The all-you-can-eat shrimp bankrupted Red Lobster. And the news reports, because who understands what a leveraged buyout is? Who understands what private equity is? I don't. And the people doing it don't. If your eyes glaze over, it should be illegal. And it is illegal. It's illegal for the Mafia to do something like this, just not illegal for private equity. It used to be illegal. It used to be, not anymore. You know, there are usury laws. Usury is against the law. So, for example, the Mafia isn't allowed to lend money and then charge more than, 16%. In California, they can't charge more than 10%. I think there's a 16% cap on what you can charge for money in New York. It's 12% in Colorado, state by state. They're called usury laws. Well, you're wondering, how come my credit card company can charge up to 36, 39%, sometimes 40%, and then they tack on fees, and it's 50% a year? Why? If they're usury laws. Well, there aren't usury laws for banks. There is no federal cap on interest rates. They leave it up to the states. So, hang on for a second. I live in New York. The law says the most you can charge me for interest, I think, is 10%. I think that's what the law is. It may be 16%. Okay. But 40%, I can end up owing Visa 40%. So how is that possible? The Supreme Court ruled It's not where the consumer lives that sets the interest rates. It's where the issuer of the credit card is headquartered. That determines what the interest rate is. Doesn't matter where you live, it's where the credit card company is headquartered. Interesting. Supreme Court ruled that. I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm not sure. Interesting about this, South Dakota and Delaware have no caps on what a credit card company can charge, which is why your credit card company can charge you whatever interest it wants, because your credit card company is either headquartered in South Dakota or Delaware, which is why you never see the owner of American Express or Visa or MasterCard. They don't live in New York City. They live in Delaware and South Dakota because that's where they're headquartered. Yeah, right. They set up their corporation in South Dakota and Delaware, not creating jobs. And they get to charge you whatever you want. If a mobster lends money at, say, 16%, tax on an additional 20% in fees for the VIG, the on an unpaid gambling debt, theoretically, that mobster goes to prison unless that mobster is Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, in which case he's a legitimate businessman who launders money for drug dealers. We know J.P. Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank are in the money laundering business. We know how hard it was for J.P. Morgan Chase to break up with Jeffrey Epstein, and they really never did. There's going to be a day of reckoning. There always is, but we end up footing the bill. We always do. It's how capitalism, or whatever you call this, survives. It always collapses on the weight of its own greed, incompetence, and corruption, and then it's always rescued by the very government it despises. The only thing that keeps America from socialism is the people in charge of our government are all owned by Wall Street. So whatever you want to call this, crony capitalism, kleptocracy, cacocracy, what do they call the incompetent? I forgot, cacocracy. Whatever you want to call our economic system, it survives by reinventing itself on our dime. It has a safety net. We don't, but this economic system does. It's why they welcome the boom and bust cycle. It's completely underwritten by taxpayer money, and that's what keeps the system from collapsing in on itself. The system grows and grows and grows, and because Americans are stupid and don't wake up one day and say, we can't keep catching these pigs when they fall, it collapses just enough to start growing again. We're in the middle of the biggest financial bubble the world has ever seen. It's just a matter of when. It's totally unregulated. Without regulation, there's no way to get a true read on what a corporation, a bond, a hedge fund, or piece of commercial and residential property are truly worth, because nobody is examining the books, because the people Trump hires don't even know how to read the books. You don't need an MBA to know it's rotten. Here in Manhattan, most storefronts are empty. Way too many luxury apartments are left empty, unsold. And yet Manhattan remains one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. We should look into that, but we're told it would be bad for the local economy to pull on that string. You don't want to look too closely at the books. It would be bad for the local economy. Trump just picked Bill Pulte to become acting director of national intelligence. He starts on Friday of this week. He will oversee our nation's 18 spy agencies and has zero intelligence background. Trump was asked about Bill Pulte, and he said, "What are the Democrats so afraid of me finding out about them?" You know, he is honest. The Senate has made it clear, Republicans have made it clear, there's no way they would confirm Bill Pulte to oversee our 18 spy agencies, so Trump nominated Jay Clayton for permanent director of national intelligence. Clayton just needs to be confirmed now, and then Bill Pulte steps aside. Clayton served as chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission during the first Trump administration. The Securities and Exchange Commission keeps track of Wall Street to make sure brokers are dealing honestly. And before that, he was a lawyer who represented Wall Street bankers and traders. This is the guy who's going to run our 18 spy agencies. A bag man for Wall Street. Again, this is how you bust out a government. This is how you bust out a government. Bill Pulte, he's going to be on Friday, acting director of national intelligence. He's got several jobs. He's also the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. And he's also chairman of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. This is how you gut a world economy. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I know your eyes are going to glaze over. Mine do. You don't want to know about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And the fact that we don't know about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is how 2008's financial meltdown happened. So I won't bore you. I think I already have, but let me just suffice to say that banks lend you money if you're lucky enough that you can buy a home, and they give you a mortgage. But banks don't want to hold on to that mortgage. It's risky. You might default. So they didn't used to do this, they do now. They sell your mortgage immediately, and it becomes an investment on the secondary market. You don't need to understand this. Nobody does. If you own a home, you have no idea who's holding your mortgage. You don't know who's getting the money. The bank made the loan and then they sold it. That mortgage has been what they called securitized, turned into a bond that's sold on Wall Street, right? Because you're borrowing money and paying it back, that's debt. That's a bond. Bonds are traded on Wall Street. If anybody understood this, it would be illegal. You're not stupid. You're not stupid. Because it's confusing and esoteric and opaque, they're able to steal trillions of dollars from us. So the intermediaries between the mortgage you purchase and Wall Street are either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. And Bill Pulte, soon to be our acting director of national intelligence, he runs Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. And that's a really important job. That's all you need to know, is that running Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is really important because it is the job of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to bundle, I think 70% of all the mortgages issued in the United States and then turn them into a security, a bond that is then sold as, a fixed income bond that pays investors a dividend. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, I think it's like 70% of the entire U.S. mortgage market. So you'd want to have somebody in charge of Fannie Mae and another person in charge of Freddie Mac. You want more eyes on it. Instead, he's got Bill Pulte. We're talking about $7 trillion in home mortgages that are guaranteed by either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Meaning, if you default on your loan and can't pay back the person who purchased your mortgage, the person who owns your mortgage will get reimbursed by Fannie or Freddie, Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. These are semi-corporations owned and operated by the government. And this is why we have a housing shortage. It's very simple. You need to build more homes, right? That's all we have to do. And there's plenty of money to build more homes. But when you do that, the laws of supply and demand dictate that the value of the housing market will go down because there's too much supply. And that means people end up owing more than their home is worth. There's a massive domino effect when housing prices tumble, which we saw in 2008. It turns into a cataclysmic chain reaction that only the government can step in and stop. It will be the responsibility of Bill Pulte, who heads both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It's his job right now to make sure all the loans being issued to buy a house are honest loans and that the people taking out those loans can pay those loans back. 2008, the financial crisis, was the end of capitalism. Capitalism died in 2008. And America should have become a hybrid system where we had state-owned businesses competing against privately owned. That's how we should have resolved the financial crisis. We should have ended up owning the banks, the insurance companies, the car companies, and every one of their executives should have been sent to prison. Maybe not the car executives. We bailed out GM. You know what? We should have locked up the auto executives as well. Hey, it's Detroit. A lot of innocent people in Detroit end up doing time. So be sweet for a white person in Detroit who didn't do anything to go to prison once in a while. So what started the 2008 financial meltdown was banks making bad loans and then selling those bad loans on the secondary market through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, which didn't bother to look inside and see whether those loans could be paid back. And when Americans began defaulting on their loans, those securities made up of bundled mortgages could no longer pay dividends. They slowly became worthless. Panic set in, and capitalism died. Dead. Close to TARP funding was the toxic acid relief funding program was like $1 trillion, close to $1 trillion. And people go, but we got our money back and then some. Yeah. We should have bought Goldman Sachs. We should have owned all the banks. And the people who owned those mortgages that were being defaulted upon, they were guaranteed to be paid back by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac paid out about $300 billion to the people who bought these mortgages. And because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac didn't have enough cash, you and I had to cover half of that. Now, in the long run, we ended up getting it all back. But that money should have been spent on increasing Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security benefits, to name just a few of the ways that money should have been spent. It is the job of Bill Pulte to keep an eye on those $7 trillion worth of mortgages to make sure they can be paid back to prevent another crisis like we had in 2008. But what has Bill Pulte been doing instead? He's looking at mortgages, but only the mortgages of Trump's enemies, like Senator Adam Schiff or New York Attorney General Letitia James, to see if they can be indicted for mortgage fraud. All of it under the guise of enforcing the law that this administration has nothing but contempt for. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. Leave a comment. Correct me if I got anything wrong. I covered a lot of material today. Help me out. I'm being throttled, as are a lot of people who are saying what I'm saying. I'm not special. I get that. So, but if you want to help me out, I don't care anymore about my pride. So go to shopdavidfeldman.com. You can donate directly there to this show. You can buy some garbage merchandise. Go to shopdavidfeldmanshow.com to make a donation. You can buy I don't care. I watched the UFC fight and I thought, what's wrong with a little shameless self-promotion to keep the lights on? You can buy the Trump Scream mug. And look, I'm not proud of this, but this is a big seller. I stopped trying to sell it after Trump got reelected, but July 4th is coming up. Pick yourself up a Hope You're in the Mood for Diarrhea chef's apron. If you want to hurt my feelings, buy it, because I fancy myself someone who does biting commentary. And when you buy Hope You're in the Mood for Diarrhea chef aprons, it reminds me of who my audience really is and the kind of crowd I've cultivated. So go to shopdavidfeldmanshow.com. You can also donate to the show there. Yeah, I mean, nobody said it was going to be easy. And quite frankly, it still is compared to, the damage that Trump is doing to other people. It doesn't surprise me that Facebook says this show is too sexual in its content. Damn my hot ass. Why was I born with such a hot ass? I'm just too sexy for Facebook. It's going to be a long, hot summer. It's going to be long and hot. Thank you.